Hey guys, welcome back to another episode of completely unnecessary history facts that you won't remember, probably don't need to know, and definitely shouldn't bring up at parties. Unless, of course, your idea of a good time involves detailed knowledge of ancient Roman bathroom logistics, which honestly says a lot about you. And me. Here we are. Tonight, or whenever you've decided to abandon productivity, we're diving headfirst into one of the least glamorous corners of the Roman Empire, the public toilet. More specifically, the poor soul whose job it was to deal with them. You know how every empire has its unsung heroes. Well, this is not that. This is the story of someone who didn't just get a raw deal. They were the raw deal. But before you get comfortable, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from and whether you're trying to fall asleep or just killing time on a night shift. I love knowing who else is out here willingly learning about historical feces management in the dead of night. It's a very specific club, and you're in it now. Picture Rome at its chaotic peak. A city stuffed with over 1 million people, all packed like sardines into narrow streets that smelled like a petting zoo, collided with a garbage dump. Indoor plumbing? Nope. That was a luxury for maybe one guy in town who didn't mind lugging buckets uphill. Instead, everyone else had to rely on public latrines, which were basically long benches with holes, yes, actual holes, lined up like a medieval strip club, where instead of scantily clad performers, you had the pungent perfume of human waste. These public toilets were architectural marvels of awkwardness. Imagine rows of marble or wooden benches, shoulder to shoulder, no dividers, and just a continuous stream of humanity sharing the same, well, let's call it a restroom experience. If you've ever accidentally opened a gym locker room door right after a 90-minute hot yoga class, you get the vibe. The kind of smell that punches you in the nose and leaves you wondering if it's too late to reinvent yourself as a desert hermit. Underneath these benches, water channels supposedly carried the waste away. Supposedly is the key word here. The water might have flowed, but let's just say it wasn't the crystal clear mountain stream you'd hope for. More like a lazy, murky trickle that smelled like someone tried to bleach a gym sock with a vinegar factory. And no, there was no flush button, unless you count the attendant manually pouring buckets of water, which was the ancient Roman equivalent of using a garden hose to clean up after a wild frat party. Ah, yes, the attendant. Now, this poor figure was nobody's idea of a desirable profession. Mostly slaves or freedmen who found themselves in the luckless position of official poop patrol. Their job was to keep this communal cesspool as sanitary as humanly possible, which, spoiler alert, was not very sanitary at all. They cleaned, refilled water channels, chased away rats, who treated the latrine like an all-you-can-eat buffet, and had to deal with patrons who smelled worse than the latrine itself. It's like being the janitor of a nuclear disaster site, except the disaster never ends and you can't call in sick. Socially, these attendants were about as popular as the guy with an unknown accent who answers the 1-800 number after an 87-minute wait and puts you on hold because he just spilled coffee on his keyboard. Nobody volunteered for this gig unless their life options were toilet attendant or death by gladiator. And even then, the toilet attendant probably had a better chance of surviving the day. No Employee of the Month awards, no raises, just the eternal grind of cleaning up other people's, let's say, leftovers. Imagine a typical day. A crowd of Romans squeezed onto the bench, all chatting, grunting, and possibly dropping coins or sandals into the abyss below. Yes, sandals were a frequent casualty, probably because the floor was a swampy minefield of filth and water. You know that moment when you find that one rotten shrimp that fell under the stove 3 weeks ago, and it has somehow transformed into a biohazard? Multiply that by 1,000, and you might start to get the mental picture. And of course, the patrons themselves were a charming bunch. Some would be polite enough to keep it down, but many were loud, gassy, and oddly social. After all, the public toilet was also a place to gossip and conduct business deals. because nothing seals a contract like the shared trauma of sitting on a bench full of holes while your neighbour coughs right next to you. All the while, the attendant stood there, maybe wishing for invisibility or at least a strong perfume, refilling water buckets, scrubbing the benches with brushes that probably doubled as ancient torture devices, and silently counting the minutes until their shift ended. It's hard to imagine a job with fewer perks. No sick days, no lunch breaks, just a non-stop parade of humanity's grossest moments, all under the hot Roman sun or the damp chill of a subterranean latrine. So, if you ever feel bad about your own day job, just remember, somewhere in ancient Rome, a toilet attendant was literally knee-deep in everyone else's crap, with no escape and no thank you. And if that doesn't make you feel better about your 9 to 5, well, maybe you should check your sock drawer for biohazards. That's just a glimpse into the daily grind of Roman toilet attendants, a job so utterly vile it makes even the worst public restroom you've ever endured feel like a luxury retreat. And if you thought that was the worst, just wait until you hear about the communal sponge on a stick they all shared. Because nothing screams clean quite like everyone borrowing the exact same used toilet paper from the entire neighbourhood. Yeah, spoiler alert, it's as disgusting as it sounds, but hey, at least you don't have to clock in smelling like a cocktail of dead fish, unwashed bodies and failed wine experiments. So, silver linings, right? If you're still awake after all that, go ahead and imagine which you'd pick. Gladiator, emperor, or the poor soul scrubbing Rome's communal throne room. Spoiler. The answer probably says a lot about your life choices. But, as grim as their daily routine was, it's nothing compared to what came next. Because when the sponge on a stick makes its entrance, hygiene takes a truly horrifying turn. Ah yes, the tersorium. If you've never heard that word before, congratulations. Your life has been blessed with the kind of ignorance that usually only comes from not reading Roman bathroom history at 2 a.m. But now, unfortunately, that ends. So, you're in a Roman latrine. You've just done your business, and you reach for what you hope is not a rat, a snake, or someone's sandal. It's a stick, with a sponge. That has been used by, let's be generous, maybe 50 people before you. Possibly more if it's market day. And this charming little tool has a name, tersorium, which sounds like a Harry Potter spell but is actually the ancient Roman equivalent of a group project in hygiene failure. Now, to be fair, it was functional. Technically. The sponge was softish, reusable, and absorbent. Great qualities in a cleaning tool, slightly less great in something you're about to rub on your most private areas. And the idea was simple. After wiping, you rinse it in a bucket of water or vinegar sitting nearby. Which sounds sanitary until you realise everyone else just did the same thing, like a communal soup pot of butt juice and regret. And someone had to take care of this system. Enter the toilet attendant. This poor soul's job was to maintain the sponge sticks, to keep them clean, to refill the vinegar bucket, which, by the way, didn't smell like a salad. It smelled like something died in a jar of pickles and then got left in the sun, and to make sure people didn't walk off with the sponge stick like it was some sort of low-budget souvenir. You have to imagine the logistics here. It's mid-August. It's 98 degrees. The air is thick enough to chew. The latrine is packed with sweaty men arguing about chariot races while hunched over in togas. One guy farts so hard he drops his coin purse. Another guy picks it up, sniffs it, and keeps it. Meanwhile, you, our long-suffering attendant, are elbow-deep in a vinegar bucket, swishing around a sponge that now looks like something a raccoon coughed up. And yet somehow, despite this shared sponge lifestyle, Romans were weirdly obsessed with cleanliness. They bathed obsessively, scraped their skin with strigils, rubbed themselves down with olive oil like they were prepping for a rotisserie. But when it came to wiping, group project. Sponge on a stick, no gloves, no soap, just vibes. It's like installing a bidet in your living room, but only letting strangers use it. And it got worse. Sometimes people brought their own sponges because they didn't trust the public ones, which is fine, until you forget which sponge was yours and suddenly you're playing Russian roulette with someone else's rectal loofah. Imagine the confusion. Hey, did anyone see my sponge? It's the one with the chipped handle and faint scent of goat milk. Even worse, people got territorial. There were probably unwritten rules, like don't use the fancy sponge with the red tassel unless you're a senator. Don't use two at once, you absolute savage. And don't, under any circumstances, rinse it after someone else is waiting to use it. That's just rude. And of course, the toilet attendant had to manage all this. Like a maitre d' of microbial doom. Guiding people to open seats, maintaining order, scrubbing sponges and refilling vinegar bowls that smelled like expired condiments and eternal despair. Oh, and if anything went wrong, if someone vomited, bled, or had what we'll gently call a digestive emergency, guess who got to clean it? Not the gods, not the senators, not the guy staring at you with the face of someone who just discovered he's been carrying a bit of sewer slime on his sandal all day. No, the sponge boy. Also worth noting, the Romans had Cloacina, the goddess of the sewer, which feels deeply insulting. Like, sure, pray to a deity of waste after you force a teenage slave to stir a poop sponge around like he's making toilet tea. And some Romans genuinely believed these rituals were part of staying healthy, because clearly nothing says immune system boost like a splintery stick marinated in communal butt sauce. We judge them, but let's be honest, how many of us have touched a subway pole with our bare hand and then eaten chips straight out of the bag? We're not that evolved. Anyway, hygiene back then was a whole fever dream of contradictions. They scrubbed themselves raw in public baths, but shared wipes like it was a Costco sample tray. They had elaborate perfumes and oils, and toilets where the air quality could be classified as biohazard adjacent. And in the middle of it all, trying to stay alive and hopefully not catch something medieval before the Middle Ages even started, was the toilet attendant. Cleaning sponges, pouring vinegar, thinking deeply about life choices, probably counting the days until death or reassignment to literally any other job, including snake wrangler or human torch operator. But the sponge wasn't even the worst part, because beneath the latrines lurked an even more horrifying dimension, one that scurried, squeaked, and occasionally bit you on the butt. Let's talk about the rats. If you thought sharing a sponge on a stick with strangers was the low point of Roman hygiene, oh, sweet summer child, we've only just crawled into the latrine. Because now we need to talk about the real occupational hazards of being a Roman toilet attendant. Not the, oh no, my sponge smells like feet and spoiled anchovies again kind of hazard. I mean the crawling, chewing, plague-carrying, demon-eyed rats that lived rent-free and bath-free in the underworld beneath every Roman backside. These weren't cartoon rats with little chef hats. These were the sewer goblins of your nightmares. Big, mean, and immune to vinegar. Some Roman latrines were practically open invitations to vermin tourism, with rats popping up through the waste channels like demonic gophers in a hell-themed arcade game. Imagine, you're just trying to do your business, making eye contact with a senator to your left and a goat herder to your right, when suddenly, squeak, a rat launches itself out of the drain like it's late for its shift. Now multiply that by every day. Because for the toilet attendant, this wasn't a fluke. This was the shift. And when you're the guy in charge of keeping the place hospitable, rat patrol is just part of the gig. No gloves, no traps, just you, a stick, and a dream. Of course, let's not forget the other permanent guest of the latrine. The smell. We're talking about a stench so bad it probably developed its own personality. The kind of smell that seeps into your clothes, your hair, your soul, You know when you accidentally microwave fish at work and then get blacklisted from the break room? Yeah. Now, imagine that fish married a dead donkey and then both of them marinated in lukewarm wine and despair. That's what these latrines smelled like, and the smell stuck. Roman toilet attendants probably couldn't sneak up on anyone, ever. You could hear them coming by nose alone, like a human foghorn of regret. Not that anyone wanted to be near them anyway. Socially speaking, toilet attendants were about as popular as a surprise colonoscopy. In a society that worshipped status, virtue, and the smell of olive oil, being the guy who wipes the sponge and fights the rats didn't exactly put you on the marriage market. Even freedmen, former slaves who somehow got upgraded to still poor but now with anxiety, would consider this job a punishment. There are Roman writings that treat this role like the ancient equivalent of being sent to HR training for eternity. And because humans are always human, you had patrons who made it worse. Imagine the worst person you've ever worked with. Now imagine them with diarrhea, no deodorant, and a sense of entitlement inherited from 10 generations of patricians. That's who you're serving, while you stand ankle-deep in last week's wine and fig-fueled regret puddle. No one said thank you, no one tipped. They might have scowled slightly less if you wiped the marble clean fast enough, or if you managed to kill the sewer rat before it reached their toga. And of course, there were no workplace perks, no lunch breaks, no sick leave, and certainly no ergonomic sandals. You didn't call in sick, because sick was just the default setting. It was more like, today I'm only partially oozing from my eyes, I guess I'm doing okay. And look, maybe you're thinking, well, at least it was a job. Sure. If you can call something a job when it involves inhaling methane clouds thick enough to qualify as a weather system and risking your toes to rat bites that probably came with bonus roundworms, and all for a wage that wouldn't even buy you a decent amphora of olive oil. It's the kind of position you only accept after losing several consecutive coin tosses with the universe. And yet, someone had to do it. Every empire is built on someone else's suffering, and in this case, that suffering came with a bucket, a stick, and a face full of sewer gas. These were the invisible gears of Roman civilization, unseen, uncelebrated, and constantly itchy. And speaking of civilization, the Romans were very proud of their toilets. They'd brag about them the same way modern people brag about their smart fridges. Ah yes, behold, running water, marble seats, communal sponge access. And meanwhile, behind the scenes, our poor attendant is battling trench foot, existential despair, and a rat the size of a house cat with nothing but a broom made from reeds and unresolved trauma. So, the next time you flush your toilet and it just works without anything biting you from below or whispering Latin curses into your sensitive parts, maybe spare a thought for whoever was on sponge duty in ancient Rome. And then take a deep breath, because at least your air doesn't smell like fermented eel sweat and public humiliation. Now, of course, Rome loved to pretend it had everything under control. Beautiful aqueducts, sparkling baths, grand sewer systems. But did any of it actually work? Well, about that. So by now, if you've made it this far, you're probably wondering, okay, but weren't the Romans supposed to be, like, really good at engineering? Yes. And also, tragically no. Because on one hand, these people invented aqueducts, bridges, underfloor heating, and concrete that somehow still exist 2,000 years later, while your apartment drywall is already cracking after 3 winters. But on the other hand, they also built a sewer system so ambitious and so poorly maintained that it regularly turned entire neighborhoods into a human soup surprise. Let's talk about the Cloaca Maxima, or as I like to call it, the Grand Canal of Regret. This was Rome's main sewer artery, an engineering marvel originally built in the 6th century BCE, back when plumbing mostly meant dig a hole and hope for the best. It was designed to drain the city's waste, both stormwater and everything you'd rather not step in barefoot, into the Tiber River. Which was, by the way, also where people fished, and sometimes bathed, and occasionally dumped dead animals because garbage collection wasn't exactly a thing. Now the Cloaca Maxima was connected to the latrines through a series of pipes and channels that, in theory, whisked waste away using gravity and a steady trickle of water from the aqueducts. In practice, it worked about as well as trying to flush a pizza box down your toilet. Great plan on paper, but somewhere around execution, things got messy. See, Rome's sewage network wasn't pressurized. It relied entirely on slope and luck. So if someone upstream dumped a particularly enthusiastic load, or if rain overwhelmed the system, what you got was backflow, which is just a polite classical way of saying congratulations, you now have a toilet fountain, and it's spraying the wrong way. And guess who got to deal with it? Our friend the toilet attendant, who by this point in the story is probably developing a 1,000-yard stare and smelling like a vintage stew made from goat hair, old wine, and shattered dreams. When the latrines flooded, they were the ones expected to grab a bucket, a stick, and maybe a desperate prayer to Cloacina, the sewer goddess, and start bailing. Literally. Bailing. Like it's a sinking ship, but the ocean is made of excrement and sadness. You can picture it. Some poor guy, ankle-deep in ancient sludge, trying to unclog a pipe with what's basically a glorified salad tong, while a senator screams at him from the bench because he can't concentrate on his very important post-lunch evacuation. And when I say clog, I don't mean a polite little hairball. I mean a congealed mass of human waste, broken pottery, old food scraps, and maybe a lost coin purse or two. Basically the Roman equivalent of a grease trap crossed with a cursed artifact. There are records of blockages so bad they had to dig up entire streets just to reach them, all while pretending this was the height of civilization. Now, because the aqueduct system delivered water constantly, thank you, gravity, some of it was routed under the latrines to keep things flowing. In theory. In reality, water pressure varied wildly, especially during dry seasons, and it turns out you can't rinse away a city's worth of filth with a polite trickle of lukewarm optimism. And let's not forget about contamination, which was a fun little bonus feature of Roman infrastructure. You'd think separating drinking water from sewage would be, I don't know, a priority, but this is the same society that shared a sponge on a stick like it was a library book. Cross-contamination was common, especially when pipes cracked or overflowed, which meant that sometimes, yes, your bathwater might be spiced with a subtle bouquet of oh no. There are actual reports of public fountains turning suspiciously brown and entire families suddenly developing what we today would call a violent gastrointestinal event. Back then, they probably just called it Tuesday. And still, despite all this, the Romans were proud of their plumbing. They wrote poems about it. They built statues of water deities smiling above the sewer grates like everything was totally fine and not even a little bit horrifying. It's the kind of pride that feels slightly misplaced, like bragging about how your compost heap doesn't catch fire every summer anymore. Let's not forget, attendants had to manually fix a lot of this. There were no hazmat suits, no protective gear, just a tunic, some sandals that had seen too much, and an expression that said, "This was not what my mother envisioned when she named me Decimus." There are stories, horribly plausible ones, of attendants being swept away by sudden toilet floods. Imagine dying in a tsunami of feces. That's not just a bad way to go, it's a cautionary tale from the universe itself. The irony is that the Romans were so close to modern plumbing brilliance. They had the architecture, the materials, the vision, but then they also had people pooping in open rows like it was a competitive sport, and thinking that vinegar rinses could solve every sanitation problem short of the plague. So next time your apartment toilet sputters or the water runs a little yellow for 5 seconds, just remember, at least it's not flowing backward, while a man named Claudius frantically scoops it out with a piece of broken amphora. And that brings us depressingly to the inner life of the Roman toilet attendant. Because yes, they had thoughts, feelings, maybe even dreams once before the job crushed those like an olive under a sandal. But we'll get there. You're not going to like where this is headed. You ever stop to think about the people nobody thinks about? Like the folks who do the job so thoroughly unglamorous, even history tries to pretend they don't exist? Take the Roman public toilet attendant. Imagine a guy whose daily grind is basically scooping human waste for a living. That was his whole world. Let's just call him Gaius once or twice, then forget the name. Because honestly, his identity was swallowed by the stench and the sponge stick he wielded. Picture him arriving at work every morning, which, to be clear, is a place that smells like a sweaty gym sock that's been forgotten in the bottom of a damp laundry basket for 3 weeks, mixed with hints of vinegar and whatever it is that makes rotting fish so devastatingly fragrant. His toolkit: a bucket, a long wooden stick with a sponge on the end, Roman-style bidet, not quite, and a face set in grim resignation. This is the hill he's dying on, the daily battlefield where no soldier would dare volunteer. But this wasn't just a janitor job. No, he was the city's unsung sanitation engineer, customer service rep for the most disgusting venue in all of Rome, and an accidental biologist observing the wildest microbial ecosystem ever recorded. His daily to-do list: unclog ancient plumbing that was about as reliable as your smartphone's autocorrect, refill the water channels meant to flush away the waste but mostly just swirling it around like a foul little whirlpool, and try very hard not to lose his mind amid the endless parade of humanity, unloading their sins and sandals into the abyss. Nobody really wanted this job. It was the social equivalent of being handed a glowing hot potato nobody else wanted to touch. It was a task assigned mostly to freedmen, people who had escaped slavery only to be chained to this thankless role. Or the unlucky few who lost the dice roll on Rome's version of Who Cleans the Toilets Today? Guess what? That guy was always our hero, or anti-hero. Despite all this, there were a few so-called perks. A steady paycheck, enough to keep from eating the same gruel that tastes like regret mixed with sadness, and a hint of wet cardboard. Occasionally, a sympathetic patron might slip him a coin, either out of pity or a desperate wish to speed up their own exit from the olfactory nightmare. And oddly enough, there was a twisted pride in surviving day after day in a place so pungent it could strip paint off a wall. But the mental toll, that's where it gets brutal. Imagine staring into an endless pit of human waste every day. Not metaphorically, literally. It's like being the only person invited to a party where everyone else is vomiting in slow motion with no breaks. You start questioning everything. Why am I here? Why didn't anyone invent the flush toilet 2,000 years ago? And what does it say about humanity that our greatest engineering triumphs were mostly about moving crap around more efficiently? He'd look around the latrines and see the ancient Roman equivalent of bathroom graffiti. Because yes, people back then were just as compelled to leave their mark in the least sanitary places. Crude inscriptions like, Secundus defecated here and lost his sandals, or, I, Marcus, swear this sponge has been used by the entire Senate. God help me. These scratched-out jokes were bitter reminders that humour is a human constant, a desperate coping mechanism in the foulest conditions. And speaking of humour, he probably heard it all, from drunken patrons belching terrible poetry about their bowel movements to philosophical debates on whether the communal sponge stick was more hygienic than the hands of a gladiator fresh from the arena. There were insults, too, hurled at the attendant, who, let's be honest, had the patience of a saint wrapped in a biohazard suit. Socially, he was about as popular as a parking ticket at a chariot race. Toilet attendants were the invisible underclass, the untouchables living at society's fringes. No fancy dinner invitations, no statues erected in their honour, just the lingering smell of their workplace following them like a bad ex. Yet Rome absolutely needed him. Without those daily efforts, the city's famously engineered sewer systems and public latrines would have collapsed into chaos. The Cloaca Maxima, Rome's grand sewer artery that sounds like something from a Roman superhero comic, might have been a marvel of engineering, but without the grunt work of this anonymous sanitation soldier, it was just a glorified cesspool. This man was the quiet hero wading through humanity's mess, literally, so the rest could keep pretending their sandals were clean. From a cultural standpoint, his existence tells us a lot about ancient Rome's attitude towards class and sanitation. They built monumental aqueducts bringing fresh water and had some of the most advanced plumbing of the ancient world. And yet, when it came to dealing with actual waste, they outsourced the disgusting jobs to society's dregs. It's like building a Tesla factory but having the assembly line run by people who haven't showered since the Punic Wars. Maybe that's the eternal human condition, trying to build grandeur and civilization atop layers of unacknowledged filth. No matter how sophisticated we get, someone's got to be the sanitation soldier of the hour, cleaning up both our metaphorical and literal messes while the rest of us walk by, noses turned up pretending we don't smell it. So next time you grumble about your job or complain that your boss doesn't appreciate you, remember the Roman toilet attendant who lived a life surrounded by the most intimate and unpleasant parts of humanity. Invisible, underpaid, but absolutely essential. Someone who, against all odds, showed up every day and scooped the crap, literally, so that Rome could keep on being Rome. And if that doesn't make you appreciate your office bathroom, well, I don't know what will. Now, if you lean back and let the crackle of this fire fill the room, maybe you can imagine what it was like to finally step away from all that stink, if only for a little while. Let the warmth settle in and drift off, knowing that even in ancient Rome, life was complicated, messy, and somehow strangely human. And hey, while you're accidentally trying to grab your phone to check what time it is, if your finger happens to wander over the like and subscribe buttons, well, I won't stop you. Just think of it as your own little ancient Roman sanitation service, helping keep this channel clean and running smoothly.